Describe the history of early Islamic North Africa, Ifriqiya, and Spain, Al-Andalus. Who was Ibn Tufayl, and what kinds of philosophical problems was he trying to solve? What is taqlid? Describe the plot of Hayy ibn Yaqzan. What kinds of things does Hayy do? What does this novel conclude about falsafa and revealed religion? Last time, we noted that the central concern of falsafa was the relationship between reason and revelation. If the Quran is true, and the sciences expose truth, then they must somehow be in harmony with each other. But the how here is what's really important. Now, there were, and there still are, many possible answers to the question of how religion and science interacts. But in this case, let's just focus on one. But to get to the author of this vision, we need to track a stream of Islamic history that we haven't discussed yet, and that is the movement of Islam into North Africa and Western Europe. Back during the heights of the Umayyad Caliphate, Islam wasn't just spreading north and east into the Persian and Byzantine lands. It was spreading west across North Africa into the lands of the Amazi or Berber tribes, and from there north into the Visigothic territories of the Iberian Peninsula, that is, modern Spain and Portugal. Islam was moving into the remnants of the Western Latin Roman Empire, which had collapsed centuries before. These lands hadn't been under a single stable government for some time, so when Arabs arrived, some of whom would have been called Muslims, they were walking into a power vacuum. By the 720s, all of the land from Egypt to Morocco and to the south of France was under the control of the Umayyad Caliph over in Damascus. And, like many Persians back in the Middle East, many Egyptians, Berbers, and Visigoths became Maulas, people who would adapt the Arabic language and the Arab ways of life. Because these lands were, on the whole, much less densely populated than the cities of the Middle East, and because they were so far from the Umayyad capital in Damascus, the Caliph set up an emir, that is, a local governor or prince, in what is now Tunisia. This emirate, the jurisdiction of one of these governors, their principality, was called Ifriqiya, the Latin Arabic name for the land of the south-central coast of the Mediterranean Sea, from which we get the modern name for Africa. Even further from Damascus was Iberia, which was under the jurisdiction of Ifriqiya. This land was called Al-Andalus, although modern people usually just call it Islamic Spain. The number of ethnic Arabs in these areas was quite small, and so the direct power of the Umayyad caliphs was stretched rather thin. The Arab Umayyads were vastly outnumbered by the native Amazi, and they were not happy. By the 730s, there had been numerous Amazi revolts throughout these lands, some of which were successful. And that shouldn't be so surprising, as at the exact same time, the Umayyads were distracted with problems closer to home. The Abbasid Revolution that would soon take them out of power. And in the year 750, when Umayyad rule in Damascus drew to a close, the lands of North Africa and Iberia spun off on their own. Most of this land would for a time be under control of the Fahrids, a wealthy Arab family in Kairouan, the capital of Ifriqiya in modern Tunisia. Besides being wealthy, the Fahrids often served as the Umayyads' emirs in the region, meaning that they benefited from Umayyad rule. So, following the Abbasid Revolution in 750, the Fahrids invited the surviving members of the Umayyad dynasty into their own lands. The eldest surviving Umayyad was Abdurrahman I, the grandson of one of the Umayyad caliphs. Abdurrahman fled for his life from his homeland, riding, running, and at least at one point swimming away from Abbasid assassins. In 756, Abdurrahman set up his own court as the emir of Cordoba in modern Spain, far from the reach of the Abbasids. And with this, the reign of the Umayyads of Cordoba had begun. Abdurrahman and his descendants were of course no fan of the Abbasid caliphs. While they nominally observed that the Abbasids had won the day and were now the caliphs, the Umayyads of Cordoba were far from Baghdad. They functioned as an independent state for the next century and a half, calling the Abbasids the caliphs, but not living under their political jurisdiction. By 929, the emir Abdurrahman III declared himself the caliph of the whole Ummah, formally breaking the Muslims of Al-Andalus from those in the Abbasid Empire. The Umayyad Caliphate in Cordoba would prove one of the most productive and provocative eras in world history. They benefited from the ascent of Arabic as an international language of politics, religion, and education, while at the same time reaping the rewards of Iberia's famously good climate. Good climate means good produce and export, and this, coupled with the influx of new Arabic literature from the Abbasid East, made Cordoba perhaps the most affluent city in the world after Baghdad. The literatures, sciences, and engineering flourished. The Iberian Jews, who also spoke Arabic, revived long-dead Hebrew as a language of poetry and culture. Indigenous forms of Islam, like the Zahri Madhab, thrived. New arts and architectural forms would spread north into Europe and south into Africa. And, like the Abbasids in their House of Wisdom, the Iberian Umayyads would become the benefactors of new translations into Arabic, and from that, new research. Cordoba became a center for learning and the convergence point for educated peoples in Africa and Western Europe. But this rival caliphate of the Umayyads didn't survive that long. By 1031, the Umayyads were overthrown by a series of invaders from North Africa. First, the Murabitun, who we call the Almoravids in English, took advantage of the death of the Umayyad caliph, attacking when the line of succession was tenuously held by the now dead caliph's 10-year-old son. And in turn, these Almoravids were overthrown a century after their own rise by another North African group in 1147. This was the religious revival movement called the Muwahhidun, who we call in English the Almohads. But the cultural snowball that started rolling under the Umayyads was going, and it kept growing. More wealth still led to more books, and more books led to more developments in science and literature, which in turn led to more wealth. And this takes us back to our question about Falsafa. The second of these Almohad caliphs was Abu Yaqub Yusuf. He invaded Iberia in 1170, and he set up his royal court in Ishbiliya, modern Seville. And there, Abu Yaqub fell madly in love with the cosmopolitan, educated culture of Al-Andalus. Like so many literate Muslims of his day, he was obsessed with all this ancient knowledge that had been translated into Arabic, and the new sciences and learning that were growing out of this translation movement. Wanting to be an educated, worldly ruler, Abu Yaqub employed famous doctors, scholars, and philosophers in his court. And Abu Yaqub rightly concluded that the key to understanding all of these extraordinary sciences and arts was in understanding Aristotle, the first teacher and the father of logic. Now, if you've ever tried to read Aristotle, you know that his works are both voluminous and are not always the easiest reads. Aristotle can be very technical, very obscure, and very often, let's be real here, rather boring. Plus, Aristotle wrote a lot, and throw in that a lot of that often gets lost in translation between Greek and Arabic. So let's just say understanding Aristotle was a full-time job. Well, Abu Yaqub had a caliphate to run, and while he was certainly an educated man who loved to read, learning Aristotle was a whole other issue. But Aristotle was also really important. Surely the most influential writer on science and logic in human history. Abu Yaqub wanted to know what Aristotle had to say, and so he commissioned others to make it easier for him. Not one but two famous philosophers in his court tried to help the caliph's problem. The younger of the two was Ibn Rushd, Averroes in Latinized English, who wrote a series of commentaries on Aristotle. And the older was Abu Bakr ibn Tufayl, called Abu Basir in Latin. Ibn Tufayl had a more engaging solution to the caliph's problem. So, the caliph wanted to learn Aristotle and Islamic falsafa quickly and in the least boring way possible, huh? Okay, so rather than just writing a philosophy book that explains other philosophy books, Ibn Tufayl decided to write a short novel, a work of fiction. Something that could be read quickly and with pleasure, while explaining to the non-specialist how Aristotle worked and how falsafa's rational knowledge related to the revealed knowledge of what's found in the Quran. In short, Ibn Tufayl was getting paid to make an easy-to-read, pleasurable book that explained science, philosophy, Islamic thought, and their relationship, all in one go. What he wrote was Hayy ibn Yaqdhan, the living, the son of the awake, a crash course on Aristotle and his relationship to Islam. Ibn Tufayl, like Islamic philosophers before him, thought that knowledge came in two different forms. The first was knowledge that you inherit from other people. This is called taqlid, literally to be led around by the neck. Taqlid is something that you don't know firsthand, but you only know because someone told you. You've never seen a knight in shining armor. You only know that such a thing exists because people, books, movies, and art have told you about them. You have no direct experience of such a thing. Your knowledge of knights in shining armor is taqlid, inherited information. Revealed knowledge about Islam, like the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, would also fall into this camp. You have never had a revelation from God yourself, and you've never met the Prophet Muhammad, so you only know these things secondhand. You can't prove that the Quran really comes from God or that the Sunnah is really the best way to live. Now, while you may trust people to relay information truthfully to you, this knowledge still remains taqlid, data that someone else led you to. The other kind of knowledge we met before. This comes from Al-Kindi's reading of Aristotle. That is, Burhan, what can be demonstrated, the demonstrable. Something that you can know because you can observe it for yourself. Sure, someone could tell you that the sun will rise tomorrow, but you can check them on this. You can observe that the sun will rise in the east at a predictable time each day, and you can know these sorts of things independently of taqlid. In other words, you can know that the sun will rise in the east tomorrow, for certain, because it can be repeatedly demonstrated to you by observation and experiment. Okay, so that means it's better and more reliable to know things that you learn for yourself by Burhan than things that you've just been told about, taqlid. Science is more reliable than hearsay because science can be easily fact-checked by anyone. But if Islam is true and it comes from God, then there must be a way to demonstrate it for yourself. If God is one and unchanging, and therefore the world that God makes works in a singular, regular way, there must be some way to demonstrate the truths of Islam without turning to taqlid. In short, Islam must somehow be demonstrable by science. To check this theory, Ibn Tufayl needs to create a situation in which a human can't learn anything from taqlid. A situation in which no one can be told anything from anyone else. A situation where everything that someone knows, they know for themselves by only their own deduction and reasoning. If Islam is true, a person untouched by the knowledge, languages, and cultures of other people should be able to arrive at Islam by the force of their own aql, by unaided reason. No revelation, no teachers, no books, no parents. Just the human mind observing the world. So what situation would create such a person? Ibn Tufayl comes up with a character named Hay, the living one, who, by mysterious circumstances, has come to find himself on a desert island as an infant. Hay has never learned how to talk, and he has no memory of any other human being. Hay's imaginary island is located exactly on the equator, so the weather is safe for humans year-round, and everything that a human could possibly need to survive is found on this island naturally. So in this setting, there's no memory of other people for Hay to learn anything from, and his environment is safe enough that he can grow to adulthood without anyone else's help. In this novel, Hay ibn Yaqdhan is the life of this child Hay in his growth into maturity alone on this island. In short, Ibn Tufayl's novel is a thought experiment. What is reason without the influence of education, received wisdom, and culture? Hay ibn Yaqdhan thus interlocks religious, scientific, and philosophical themes throughout, blending one genre into the other. As the story progresses, and Hay follows from one conclusion to the next, he arrives at increasingly nuanced understandings of biology, physics, logic, cosmology, and they all seem to point to an invisible agent behind it all that we would call God. Hay as an infant mysteriously appears on a desert island. Ibn Tufayl is writing a fiction here, and so he gently reminds us not to be too bothered about how this would have happened, right? It's just a thought experiment. This baby is then found by a doe, and she happens to be able to nurse and protect him. So for a number of years, this doe acts as Hay's own mother, guarding him and feeding him until he's old enough to fend for himself. Then, one day the doe dies, and young Hay doesn't understand what happened to her. He's seen dead animals before, but when he inspects her body, he can't see anything wrong with it. Something is not working, but everything looks just fine. And so, Hay concludes, there must be something that was in her body before that made her alive, which is now either departed or broken. But this thing that is departed or broken wasn't made out of any material, because he can see that there's nothing missing or broken in the doe's body. So he concludes, there has to be something immaterial that makes living things live. Something that cannot be seen or touched, but still gives them life and activity. Later, Hay sees a bushfire on his island and he investigates it. After some experiments in which he gets burnt a little bit, he figures out how to handle and sustain the fire. He realizes that it consumes things, it turns things into good food for him, and it produces light, as long as it's fed and has air. But fire isn't matter. It isn't solid, liquid, or gas by itself. It's kind of like the immaterial thing that once made his mother, the doe, live. It's warm, it eats, it gives him food, and it moves. Further, it seems to want to move upward at all costs. Fire always points to the sky unless something makes it move. Perhaps that's where immaterial things want to go. And sure enough, when Hay looks up to the sky, he sees that there's little glowing fires up there. But they don't point down like the fire on Earth. And yet they do move. These lights in the skies move in an endless, perfect circle. On Earth, immaterial life moves upwards. In heaven, it moves in a circle in perfect harmony for all time. By the time Hei is 21, he's figured out how to wield fire, make weapons and clothes for himself, and how to store food. He's also slowly noticed the different forms of natural phenomena that occur around him. The animate and the inanimate, the living and the dead, the plants and the animals, and the genuses and species of each. Deer all behave like this, trees all behave like that, and so on, as determined by their natural parents. But beneath it all, there seems to be some kind of singular principle that governs everything possible. Everything living is born and then it dies and decays. Or if Hei starts to move a stone, when he stops pushing it, it stops moving too. The natural world, full of boundless diversity, all seems to have a regular governing power which acts eternally and without end and without exception. And like his hand can move objects, this agent of the whole universe moves everything, everywhere, all the time, but without end. Further, it doesn't seem to have a body. Hei has never seen this agent, and yet it must somehow be there behind the scenes. When Hei is 28, he's looking at the stars again. And, like everything else, they're moving. But unlike everything else, the stars move without exception. They are entirely regular. A deer or a bird may move, but their motions are unpredictable. They change, they start, they stop. But the stars aren't like that at all. Hei can observe them again and again, and they never, ever slow down, speed up, or depart from their courses. They are in perfect, eternal motion. But these lights in the sky, though they're eternal, can't themselves be the unseen agent of everything, because he can see them, and he can see that they're moving, which means that they're being moved by something other than themselves. Plus, he also deduces that these stars must be limited in size, since they're parts of a whole, and therefore cannot be infinite. Indeed, Hei concludes that the entire physical universe must be finite in size because it's composed of parts. Since you can't add finite amounts to make an infinite amount, the universe can only be so big. It must have limits. And so, the unseen agent of everything must not be part of the universe, and neither can it itself have parts. It must be one. By the age of 35, Hei concludes that this agent of all things must be extremely wise, beyond time and space, and wholly perfect and complete. It must need nothing, depend on nothing, and never change. And at the same time, the agent is generous and giving. Everything that Hei knows about and loves must come from it, as must he himself. Hei is at once fascinated by this invisible agent, wants to be close to it, and he also wants to be like it because it's perfect and good. If this unseen agent, like the unseen thing inside of his mother the doe, and like the fire, is not a material, material things must not be perfect. So, Hei starts observing all of the animals and realizing that they're all in it for themselves. They only seem to care about their material bodies. Everything they do is about food, sex, water, and survival, taking care of their physical forms. But he's also deduced that the most perfect things in the universe are not bodies at all. And so, Hei concludes that he should try to do things to be more generous to other beings, like the great unseen agent is. But he should not be any more concerned with his own physical body than he needs to be. Since it seems that plants don't suffer the way he and the animals do when they get injured, Hei develops a strict diet which is basically vegetarian. But if he sees a living thing in distress, he must also try to help it. If an animal is hurt or hungry, Hei assists it. If a plant needs more water or light, he moves it. That is, Hay has a moral obligation to act in certain ways and not others, to be generous, and that seems to be what the unseen agent wants from him. Hay also notices that there are some things that he can do with his body to understand the agent better. For example, since the agent doesn't move and change, if Hay himself sits still and doesn't move, even trying to calm his mind so that his thoughts don't move either, then somehow he feels closer to the agent and understands it better. But it seems to take practice, and so he decides to set a schedule for these meditations several times a day, every day. Other times, when he notices that he can't really escape movement by himself, he mimics the eternal stars, which seem to be the closest thing to the agent, but still have bodies like Hay himself has. So, Hay, mimicking the stars, walks and runs in circles around the island and around his home, copying the motions of the stars above. And other times, he just spins around in circles until he loses consciousness, which, to him, while kind of silly, seems to be quite telling, as there seems to be some kind of relationship between perfect circular motion and moving beyond what the rational mind can normally detect. And so Hay continues his observations, his moral code, and his meditations as the years go by, and he finds that he's becoming increasingly content with his growing knowledge of the world and its mysterious maker. Then, one day, there appears on Hay's island a man named Asal. Asal lived on a neighboring island full of people, and he decided to move to an empty island in a kind of retirement. One day, Asal and Hay see each other, and Hay, for the first time in his life, recognizes an animal that's like himself. Meanwhile, Asal just assumed that Hay was a man on some kind of spiritual retreat from the world, like he was. Gradually, they observe each other more and more, and Hay notices that Asal also follows dietary laws. He does a kind of regular meditation several times a day. He cares for the order and cleanliness of his environment, and Asal even offers Hay food, just like Hay does to the animals. In time, they start interacting, and slowly Asal teaches Hay how to speak his language. Hay, being abnormally bright, picks up speech quickly, and soon Asal and Hay are dear friends. Asal tells Hay that long ago on his island, there was a person sent by God to teach people how to live, a prophet. This ancient unnamed prophet told the people there to care for each other, to give alms, to fast, to pray, and to travel in particular ways to particular places on pilgrimage. Hay, realizing that he does very similar things, concludes that this God must be the same unseen agent of the universe that he loves so much and tries to emulate. So, Hay and Asal conclude that they will go back to Asal's home island so that Hay can learn more, and that the people there can meet this remarkable Hay. They notice a passing ship and they flag it down. Soon, Hay and Asal are back on Asal's home island, and the people there are amazed by Hay and his unusual story. And although Hay notices that his practices and their revealed religion are very similar, they don't seem to understand why they do what they have to do. Some of them seem to break the laws of their own religion. Others follow the laws so strictly that they never think for themselves. Both those people who don't follow their religion well, and those who follow it to the letter, confuse Hay. How do some of them not love their God enough to obey it? And yet others only obey it but don't understand why they obey. And so, Hay concludes that the problem in both cases is that while all the people of this island have the right religion, and that it truly does come from God, they don't understand it from their own experience. They don't have Burhan. Some don't follow this religion well because they don't understand for themselves why they should follow it. Others who follow without questioning are just shallow, judgmental, and overly concerned with laws and rules. They don't really love their God. They just love their religion. Finally, Hay and Asal agree that it's best for them to leave, and they return to the deserted island to please God on their own. Hay teaches Asal his religious practices, and vice versa. and Hay happily realizes that his love of God seems to be increased when he experiences God with his friend. And so, this little two-man Ummah spend the rest of their lives alone on this island, until they both die peacefully and content. So what's Ibn Tufayle's novel Hay ibn Yaqzan doing? First, it explains to the audience how to use logic and the aql on the material world in order to arrive at new information. That is, to use burhan, demonstrability. This is actually a metaphoric explanation of Aristotelian logic by syllogism. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Second, Ibn Tufail has shown how the tenets of Islam are rational and part of the natural world. The knowledge of one God, prayer, almsgiving, fasting, and pilgrimage are inseparable from the world of science. Throughout the novel, science and Islam move back and forth, proving and reinforcing one another. Tawheed, the source of all reality, is one, and so all truths in all forms must be one too, scientific and religious. And third, and a little bit subversively, Ibn Tufail concludes that falsafa is better than taqlid. Someone who uses their aql well to do experiments and make observations is more correct in the eyes of God than someone who just practices taqlid. Someone who just follows teachings that they hear without understanding why they do what they do. Ibn Tufail is not the only one of the Islamic philosophers to come to a conclusion like this. And naturally, some Islamic theologians saw this as more than a little arrogant. Next time, we'll encounter the famous Al-Ghazali and his response to such philosophers. Describe the history of early Islamic North Africa, Ifriqiya, and Spain, Al-Andalus. Who was Ibn Tufail, and what kind of philosophical problems was he trying to solve? What is taqlid? Describe the plot of Hay ibn Yaqzan. What kinds of things does Hay do? What does this novel conclude about falsafa and revealed religion?